I'm going to open another image because maybe I want the shape of that fish thing to, change where something else shows up. So I'll open this guy, and I want to somehow use that fish shape within this. Well, you remember when you go to the Select menu and you choose Save Selection? Usually it saves it within this file, but you see at the top it says Document. I could choose another document. The only problem is it'd have to be the exact same size. The width and height in pixels would have to be the same in order for it to show up in this menu. And that other file is not the exact same size, so it doesn't show up here. I could grab a selection tool, though, and I could click in the middle of this, because usually that allows you to move it, reposition it. And I can drag it to another tab and then drag down into this image. And even though it's not previewing it, when I let go, I have it. Right? I just dragged a selection between two files. I'll add a layer mask to this. Now it's showing up inside of the shape of a fish. Right? Choose Undo. Let me do that again, because there are some things that people mess up on this. I used to. And that is, I need to be in a selection tool, so it knows I want to move a selection and not the picture. If I was in something like the Move tool, it would mean move the layer. The physical part of the image that you're seeing. But a selection tool, if you click in the middle of the selection, you should be able to move it around. And what you want to do is move until you're on top of another tab. That tab will come to the front, but don't let go yet. Your mouse can't still be on top of the tab. Drag down into your picture so it's within the image, then let go, and you'll see it. So yes, you can bring them between documents. Other questions?
Yeah, how can you turn a selection into a mask when you want it to be a mask?
Well, all a mask is a selection attached to something.
Right.
And so you need to figure out what is it you want it to be attached to. Mm-hmm. If it's a layer, just make that layer active, clicking on it in the Layers panel. And while the selection is visible, add a layer mask. Okay. That layer mask icon at the bottom, it looks like a circle inside of a rectangle. If there's a selection active at the time that you click it, it's going to convert it into a mask that's attached to the layer. Mm-hmm. So if I brought it over to that other image, brought it down here, look at my layers panel, you see the layer sitting there. I come down here and I click the layer mask icon. If there's a selection active, it just got converted over, and now you can see it right there. Okay? So you need to just click on what it is you want to attach it to, and then click the layer mask icon, and it'll go boop, got on there. Okay? Unless there was already one attached. Like right now, there's already one attached. Okay. Now if I click on that, what I would have to do is simply modify this mask by grabbing the paintbrush tool. And the only area I can change is what's selected, because that's how selections work. So right now if I paint, the paint will only go into where the selection is. So I can paint. And since this is what was active, there's the paint. I just hid that part. But that can get a little confusing. So, any other little ones you want to sneak in?
No, we got two fun comments, though. Channels have always been on my bucket list, but I never thought I would get there. So people are really getting this as you're walking through it.
What's really funny about it, though, is if that same person says they love quick mask mode or layer mask, that means they love channels, because that's what they are.
Right.
It's just people are afraid of channels because somebody made them scary. Right?
Awesome. One more comment.
Yeah.
That section totally rocked. I cannot express how clear the mask concept is now. So,
okay. So now what we need to learn, though, are different ways of making selections. That just means isolating an area. And we need to know different ways of manipulating masks, meaning when they're in the form that doesn't look like little marching ants, things we can do with them. So we could explore that a little bit. For instance, I can type the letter Q right now so that this is looked at as a red overlay. When that's looked at as a red overlay, it's just like a grayscale picture. Because if you were to go look in the channels panel, that's what it is a grayscale picture sitting there. Anything you could use on a grayscale picture, you can apply to that. So if I want the edge of this to look different, I could come over here and blur it if I wanted to soften its edge. Then when I was done, it would look as if I used a soft edge brush to paint it, if I blurred it. I could come down here to distort, and you remember there's a filter called ripple? Well, I could apply that right now. And I'll see if I can zoom out on this little preview here. See it rippling the edge? Choose my amount. I probably want a smaller ripple on that. Click OK. And now if I zoom up really close, because it's hard to see, can you tell the edge is no longer straight? I'll just choose undo, before, after, it's rippled. But when it looks like a mask, a channel, or a quick mask, it's a grayscale picture. And any tool that would work on a grayscale picture can be used to modify it. That means filters will work, adjustments will work, anything will work that would work on a grayscale picture. And that means that might be 60% of Photoshop would work on it. Choose undo. So what that means is if I came in here and I need to change this, I'm not limited to painting with paintbrush tools. I can use anything to change this that would work on a grayscale picture. And it's just a matter of me deciding what would be useful. And not everything is useful, but it's available. And sometimes it can be overly useful. So selections, channels, masks. They're in essence the same thing in different forms. They're either attached to something, they're saved into the channels panel, or they look like little marching ants. But in general, they isolate an area. If it's attached to something, it's saying only make a certain part show up of this thing. If it's a selection like this, it means whatever I do next, only do it there. That kind of thing. All right. So what I'd like to do is get away from that concept for a while, because for most people, the moment you bring up channels and you start doing some things, your brain, it seems like a third of it in the backside just melts away, and you're like, it happens to everybody, it seems. And you need to get away from it for a while and then come back. And when you come back, the more times you come back, the more you're like, wait a minute, is it really like that? And then your brain starts figuring out after a while that it's actually a relatively simple concept, even though it feels overly complex, because there's lots of places it can show up in, and there's lots of terms people can use for them. Because when we saved them with our file, weren't they called alpha channels? Why isn't it called saved selections? They could have called it that. The channels palette could be called saved selections panel. And then you'd be like, oh, okay. And then a layer mask could be called selection attached to layer, thing. And your brain would be going, oh, it's selection attached there. It's saved there. I'm saving it in my file. And it wouldn't be as confusing. But they like using a lot of terms when they do things. All right? So before we get away from them, I'll mess with you just a little bit. I want to turn this into a selection. Let's figure out how. First, to introduce you to the concept, let's make a selection using a selection tool. I'll use the lasso tool. There's a selection. Then I'll modify that selection using quick mask. Do you remember quick mask is the letter Q? Or that's the icon on the bottom left, right below your foreground and background colors. Q. Then I'll modify it by grabbing my paintbrush and painting. It's the sun. You can tell I can't. I'm using the trackpad on my laptop. Don't expect much here. If you want to be able to draw, get a Wacom tablet. Now I'm going to type the letter Q, and what's going to happen? We're going to have a selection of that shape, aren't we? Okay. Does that make sense from what you've learned thus far? Okay. Now I'm going to get rid of that selection, and let's turn that into a selection. How are we going to do it? Well, I'm going to select all, and I'm going to copy it. Okay, so we have that copied. It's stored on what's called the clipboard. It's just a hidden place where it's stored whatever you copied. And now let's try the same thing. Let's say I had a selection again. I type the letter Q. This time, I'm not going to paint. Why don't I just paste the picture in? If I go over here and choose paste, it's going to paste it into whatever's active right now. What's active is this thing called quick mask. Paste. I don't know if you can tell or not. It's hard to see. It pasted the picture in. So the parts that are red are the parts where the black stuff was in there. The parts that don't have red on them is where the white paper was. The only problem is the paper was not perfectly white. And so where the paper is, I see this little hint of red. That's because there's a hint of something there other than whiteness. It was a shade of gray where the paper was. And the text that was there, this ink that's here, didn't scan in as perfectly black. Had it come in with a perfectly white background in a perfectly black text, I could hit Q right now and be done, and I would have a selection. But instead, I need to adjust what we have to make it so that where the ink was here is black and where the paper was is white. And so I can make an adjustment. There are many different adjustments we can use. I'm going to use one called levels. Do you see our bar chart? Do you remember how they work? Do you remember how black's on the left? And this is more and more and more light. Do you see a hump right there? That means that things that are a bit brighter than black, they take up some space. I bet you that's the ink that's there. You can actually see how bright it is when you're in levels. Go straight down. This is how bright it is. The bar chart lines up with this thing. There's black. This forces things to black, and if I pull it into right there, I just forced what was in there to black. This forces things to white. Do you see that huge, really tall thing? That's the white paper. It didn't scan in as solid white, it scanned in as around this bright. But if I bring this in until it goes to the other side of that hump, I just made it white. Click OK. Now I'm going to type a letter Q. We have a selection shaped exactly like this object. The only problem is, do you remember when we use quick mask mode? When we paint with that black stuff and it shows up as red on our screen? That usually indicates where it's not selected. So right now we have everything except for where that black stuff was selected. But if I want the opposite, I choose inverse, right? And now I have exactly the text selected and exactly the cake selected. And there was something on the edge, on the right edge and the bottom edge of my file that had blackness on it that also is selected. So let's add a layer mask and see what happens. We just isolated that from its background. Now for some of you, that's way too much to think about. But it's actually relatively simple once you get used to the individual pieces used. Because quick mask mode, you just paint with black. It shows up as a red overlay because it's overlaid on your picture. But wherever you put the black is where it's not selected. We just happened to paste that in. And it thought we just painted it all in. And it became what was not selected. When we turned quick mask mode off, we had the exact opposite of what we wanted, so we had to choose inverse to get it. But we've now isolated that from its background. Right? You'll have to practice that a few times if you've never done it before, but it's overly useful. If you ever scan your signature and you want to get the background to be gone, if you ever scan a logo, you want to get the background to be gone, all that kind of stuff. There is other things we can do with that, but it's anytime you scan something that is close to black on a close to white background, you can do that technique to do it. So I'm going to do it one more time because it messes with people. I'm going to select all, and I'm going to copy this. After that, I don't have to choose it, but I'm going to choose deselect just because we don't need the selection that's there. It's okay if it was still there, but we don't need it. Then I can turn quick mask on. You don't even need a selection there when you turn quick mask on. We're used to starting with a selection, and we turn quick mask on, and you see it convert. But you could just type the letter Q to go to quick mask, paint, type the letter Q to turn it off, and you made a selection that way from scratch. So it doesn't matter if you have a selection or not. Just type Q, paste, and then adjust what you have to make sure that you had solid black and solid white. And all you got to do is move this black slider to the middle of one hump and move the white slider to the end of the other hump. What this means is make all of the paper turn white and make most of the writing turn black. You type Q to get out of quick mask mode, and then you're going to have the white area selected. So if you need the opposite, choose inverse. So a lot of little steps there. That's why we did it twice. And if you buy the course, you can pause me, play it back, pause me, play it back, try it again, play it. And then if you've done it 5 times and you play a little bit with the techniques used, then it actually becomes no problem. And once you get the concept of selections, masks, and layer masks, all that stuff, then this is child's play as far as what you're doing. It's just equivalent to painting that shape. You just happen to paste it in. But it takes a while to get to that point.